a new hour for us starting. I hope people will adjust to that. And I will start with comments on the minutes of our last meeting and ask for their approval.
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes. Do we have any public comment?
Mark Mutuer, 617 Indian Lilac Road. Just a couple of quick things. I did notice that you're now meeting at the exact same time as the County Commission. So if anybody wanted to watch this or go, they can't. Or watch either one. You can't do both. The other quick thing is, some of you are new. I recall, maybe it was a couple of years ago, they charged this commission specifically, but all boards and commissions, I guess, to some extent, with the task of educating the public in the area for which you're responsible. And I'll give you an example. I just think you need to keep that in mind and try and do a better job. Scott's memo to, Chef Wright's memo to Scott in the minutes talked about the closing of the power plant and the offset of the capacity payments and all that kind of stuff. Well, I read in the paper and in the comments and in the gossip blogs all the time, people saying, oh, all we got to do is close the power plant and we put $5 million in our pockets and we reduce our rates 6%, and that's a no-brainer. Well, obviously that isn't the case at all. One, because of the contractual arrangements, and two, because of the offsetting costs of closing the plant, which are not only the capacity payments, but the fact that it's just mothballed and there's maintenance and insurance and all kinds of other things, plus the employee costs that when you lay all those people off and those kind of things. So I just use that as an example so that you all keep in mind that part of your job is to educate the public. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Jim, can I ask you a question about one of the points that Mark raised? I know it's come up before, but on the topic of education, I personally have felt long ago that it would be nice for some general information to get to the ratepayers. And to me, the best device to use would be tip something in the electric utility bill, just giving them not overwhelming information, but just every once in a while a little tidbit of information about usage or about just the basics about the power operation. It just seems like it would be a perfect vehicle to disseminate information. And of course, I know it would cost something. Has that been discussed before?
Yes, sir. It's been discussed many times, as a matter of fact, and trying to narrow down the issues into a 30-second soundbite has been the real challenge as to doing that. And some of it, if it was very small, it wouldn't really cost that much to do it. The bad part is you put out a soundbite, we put out a soundbite, it appears that other folks can put out soundbites and not have the same issue, but then it draws in more questions and speculation as to the conclusions being drawn. But we've struggled with that and trying to figure out how do you get that out in front. I mean, we've gone as far as talked about, do we need a public relations company, but then I think from the press standpoint, the cost of that would be what would take the hit, so we don't really want to get off where you lose sight of the message being sent and we talk about something extrapolated from the discussion. And if there's anything, and I think what Mark said is correct, that's why we really try to use the Finance Commission, the Utility Commission, and we bring basically the same things to you all to try to get the word out and to get the discussion and get down not only in the detail, but to try to make it simplified. So to this point, we have really relied on the coverage of the various commissions, because we go, again, from the Utility Commission or the Finance Commission, and both of them at typically the same issue to the city council in which these items are discussed. And then we also have backup to that documentation, as you know in here, and the conveyance of information really comes down to the press. And unfortunately, in the city of Vero Beach, we have three views of the same topic from the press that seems to have the most readership, and that really is a challenge, and I don't know how to overcome that. And putting stuff, if you all know something that we could put into the utility bill, even if we had to spend a couple of dollars, I think it'd be worth it. But again, I'm just not sure what tidbit we would put out that addresses an issue. What Mark brought out about the utility.
My feeling is something as simple as every time I read an article in the paper comparing us with Florida Power and Light, the number 30% is always hanging there. And we all know that number 30% is not correct. Well, whatever it is, it's not 30. And it just seems that's one little thing that can be mentioned with something else. I wouldn't focus just on that, but I'd welcome anyone on this committee that if they have any ideas about how we could get some education to the public. We don't necessarily have to do it now, but we can just...
I have a kind of a question and a suggestion. Has there ever been a public information officer or person on staff designated to disseminate, information?
Yes, sir. That position's long been since cut.
Pardon?
Yes, sir. That we did have one, but we've long since cut that position. But, Mr. Chairman, just coming back to the comment you just made, between you and Mark, it went from 30% to 25%, and it depends on how you arrive at that. And whatever the numbers out there, it becomes a point of discussion depending on how you analyze and put that in perspective. The fact of the matter is, we're talking maybe $5, $6 a month. So but again, subject to change at the next evaluation of the rates by either the Public Service Commission or ourselves. But I don't know how, again, to approach that. I mean, even in just the dialogue between two people, you went 5% differential.
Good point.
Yeah.
Well, we'll keep our eye on it. Anyone has any ideas?
Yes, sir. And any way that you can come up with some ideas for dissemination of information, we'll be very glad to do that.
Thank you.
We used to put flyers out with it, which took a fair amount of effort to decide what was in there. One of the things you have to be careful of, it's got to be pretty totally non-political, which we're way too political as it stands now anyway. But that's just an extra. But a little bit on the same subject, are we still being broadcast or meetings?
City council meetings, yes, and there's simulcast.
Okay, but we're not.
Yes, sir. Sure.
Yes.
We are? Okay, because I haven't been able to watch since I'm here and stuff.
We don't replay the meetings, but you're being broadcast live now.
Yeah, okay.
The city council are
that's a help,
replayed.
Yeah, I knew the city council. It's hard for me to watch one. So.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next on the agenda is new business and the wastewater treatment plant solids handling modifications. Excuse me, I was just looking for you, Bob. You're standing right there. It's your show.
Okay. Good morning,
Good morning.
Commissioners. Rob Bolton, Water and Sewer Director. Some of you are new faces on the Utility Commission since we approved this project probably over a year ago. So I'll kind of do a brief introduction into what a Clean Bee system is. And Aaron Zahn, the CEO of BCR Environmental, is here today to talk further about composting once I finish. But we started about a year and a half ago looking into changes at our wastewater plant for our solids handling. Currently, we digest the sludge that comes off the wastewater treatment process, and then have a contract hauler come in and dewater. So there's a little bit of a process. We pull off clarifier, we store, we aerate, we thicken, and then we have somebody come in and dewater and truck it to a landfill. There's a high cost in that. It's a high energy cost. So BCR Environmental started with a process called a neutralizer originally, and they were in the biosolids business for taking sludge to a Class AA standard, which could be marketed as fertilizer. In the process, they came up with a shortened system which achieves the same thing that we've been achieving, which is a Class B biosolid, but at they can actually, something that takes us 30 to 45 days to achieve, they can do it in 12 minutes. So it cuts out all of that energy cost that we have to aerate and thicken digested sludge over a period of 30 to 45 days. So there's a huge savings there. They've also coupled with a company called Centrisis into processing right off of our clarifier, injecting or actually mixing with two chemicals that form chlorine dioxide and create a Class B solids that's then dewatered. So the dewatering side of it is a company called Centrisis. We approved this concept back about a year and a half ago. We've been going through the process of getting a contract with BCR and have run into some hurdles that neither one of us saw. Actually, they were kind of wrapped around some of the IRS issues that we thought we could have some savings through taxes by dealing with purchasing direct from BCR. However, because BCR is doing part of the install in the form of they are writing the program that actually has their system talk with the Centrisis system, they are considered a contractor at that point. Once they're considered a contractor, then the tax savings, we can't realize those tax savings. So instead of going, and we took a long time going down that avenue to find out that we had some IRS issues. So we backed up and regrouped and decided at that point that the best thing that we could do would be to have them take the form of a design-build contractor. And that's what you'll see in front of you today. So in essence, they are the contractor. So they will be purchasing and installing most of the parts. We will still do what we call a direct owner purchase of the Centrisis system, which is about $470,000. So we will realize about a $25,000 or $26,000, might be $29,000 tax savings there. But the rest of it will be installed by CleanBee as a turnkey, or by BCR as a turnkey situation. Since about a year and a half ago, we had done an evaluation of the financial savings of it. I updated it, and there's a few little glitches, but let me get it out to you this morning, and you can take a look at it, and I'll pull it up for the audience.
Thank you.
Morning. Thank you.
We have plants in the way now. Okay, under our current process, the existing process at the wastewater plant, we have a digester blower that's 150 horsepower, a biofilter fan. We have biofilter media replacement. We have a thickener that we run. We have polymer costs, caustic costs, cost to Synagro for dewatering and hauling off. We have landfill fees. And then also we have scheduled a digester rehab. We have the bottom airflow, PVC parts and diffusers and everything else are 20-something years old and they need to be replaced. So there was a capital cost that we had scheduled that we won't have to do if we put the Clean B system in place. It looks a little different here. There we go. So I can probably skip the outgoing years and just, oh, there we go. The new version. Let me just shrink it a little bit more. Having a little difficulty here with this. Oh well. See if it'll come back. There we go. Anyway, our annual cost for our existing conditions is $423,000. Now, when we go with the BCR system, and I can't seem to be able to toggle back. Oh, there we go.
Rob, if you highlight the column.
Yeah, it's got. There it is. It's right there. There's the button back there. Yeah. Anyway, if we go with the Clean B system, there's, and I updated the interest cost on this, but there's a cost of $1.55 million. However, we save on not having to run the digester. We can put a VFD on our biofilter fan and reduce energy costs. We will only have to replace a portion of the media at the biofilter that we have out on the water and shut down at least a third, maybe 2/3 of that filter that we have. So at the end of the day, the savings here, if you look at it, we'll go from $423,000 to $165,000. So there's a $240,000 a year savings. Now, we projected that out over the years and actually ran numbers if we were to convert to FPL in the future. I think I did that in year 2018 just as a comparison figure. But if you look at it over a 7-year period, there's a $2 million savings. So along about year 5 to 6, you pay for the capital costs that were incurred, and then you start realizing a $250,000 a year savings moving forward from there. So if you look at rate of return, we're roughly in the 17 to 20-something% depending on what year you're looking at when we were doing capital projects. So it is a positive from a cost standpoint, and that was one of the reasons why we decided a year and a half ago to move forward with it. So I'm here today to ask for your blessing on moving this to the City Council for their approval. If you want to go ahead and bless it and hear from Mr. Zahn on the composting side of it. At the end of the day, we would love to get out of going to a landfill with the biosolids and go to a composting facility so that we're not filling up landfills with something that is reusable. He will give an update on where they are as a company to be able to handle our biosolids that'll be leaving the plant in the future. So if you want to hear from him first.
Excuse me, how many other communities use the system now, the Clean B?
Right now, the closest community is Fort Pierce. They just went online with it. There are a couple of units up in Clay County. I don't know if...
U.S. Navy.
And the Navy. The Navy has quite a few units online. And
And it's been in use for how long, and how proven is the system?
2010 was the first system.
do you want to come up, Aaron, and let Aaron answer those questions? But they also have neutralizer systems. The original parent project of this have been around for a long time. But I'll let Aaron answer those.
Thanks, Rob. Commission. Sir, Mr. McDermott, Commissioner McDermott. I guess from a proof is in the pudding, the US EPA has actually reviewed it, and we're in the process of getting national certification for it nationwide. DEP, we actually had to go and build 3 facilities full scale and demonstrate it to them in terms of disinfection stabilization properties in order to get it permitted in the state. And we did that back in 2009-10. And since then, we've actually built 5 facilities that have been operational, no downtime, no incidents since 2010. And we've have 100% client satisfaction. We've provided Rob and your city with references from not only the national US EPA, but the DEP as well as the client base for them to call. And they did so, I think, a year and a half ago before even proceeding down this path.
Thank you.
We did extensive due diligence back in 2013 on this, and it took several months of meetings for the commission back then to be satisfied with the due diligence. And in the end, we were. And so I'll make a motion that we approve this and let Rob send it to City Council.
Is there a second? Is there a second? I'll second it. Any discussion? Go ahead.
I have a question.
Just for information. Rob and I went down to Fort Pierce and actually saw where the ribbon cutting was, and would encourage any commissioner that wants to go down and see the operation. This is, when you see it, it's a pretty simplified operation, but it may be worth your time to go down, and the Fort Pierce utilities will show you the entire process.
Does the new sludge management alternative fit into existing structure? In other words, no brick and mortar involved in this switch?
Yes, sir. We're going to actually be retrofitting into a portion of your facility, as well as building a little bit of an addition. So,
is that cost represented on this spreadsheet?
It's all. This is a 100% design, build, turnkey cost that you are seeing in front of you.
Okay.
So, as I like to say to Rob, you have one nectar ring.
And let the record show that on the video, it says $1,350,000 capital cost, and ours says $1,550,000.
Yes, you could see where I penned that in, and that's why I announced
just
that.
mentioning for the public.
The paperwork. It's in the paperwork too, in here that it's $1,550,000.
Additionally, one of the advantages to this system is that if we were to ever move the sewer plant, this would be very, well, not portable in the sense, but it would be able to uninstall it, move it, and reinstall it. So it's not going to be a sunk cost into the fixed structures there at the
correct.
location.
About probably about $1.1 million of the cost would be you could, or actually a little bit more than that would be you could relocate. So your cost of the concrete and the structure there, a couple $100,000 that by the time it was all done, but the bulk of it would be able to be relocated.
You're saying $1.1 million out of $1.5 million?
It's actually probably, just running numbers and thinking back in my head, it's probably actually more than $1.1 million is just the equipment, but included in that was the programming and some of the other stuff that goes along with it also. So if you're just looking at the concrete and the little structure work, you're probably talking about a couple $100,000 of that $1.5 million that would remain on the site and you couldn't pick up and move.
Has any provision been made for decommissioning the existing plant and tearing it down, or?
The digester, which is in the center of, the digester number 1, which is in the center of the plant itself, will be cleaned and left in place for any type of emergency. If something were to go wrong with the unit, we'd have to go back to digesting. Digester number 2, I'll probably look at what the cost is of decommissioning that. That's a circular tank, right? Either way, we will remove everything from it clean, probably take the top off of it, but I'll get pricing on decommissioning that portion of it. We've started years ago, as we take something offline, we start tearing it down instead of leaving the structure in place, just so we don't have to maintain a structure and paint a structure.
Why, with all the due diligence that was done 2 years ago?
Yes.
Why didn't we enter into this agreement then? Because this, to me, this, the old saying, it looks too good to be true.
Back then, it was the conceptual. We had to go through the design process. In other words, we looked at the evaluation, and then we had to get started on design. And like I said, as we started through the design process and we're moving forward, we had the IRS issue. After that, if we put something out to bid, we can't, since they're the only company that has this type of a product, I can't put a design out, have him bid on something if he's the only bidder. So we had to go the avenue of more of a design build contract type process. So it was just a matter of working out those details and getting past those roadblocks that we saw that has taken us to this time.
Thank you.
You mentioned the composting. Is that part of it, or is that a separate?
No, that's not part of this contract.
Well, either before or after, I'd like to hear
Understood.
Something about that. What's going on?
Would you like to move forward, or I can answer the compost.
We have a motion on the table. We're going to have one public comment behind you.
Oh, I'm
before
sorry.
We vote.
And sir, to your comment of it's too good to be true, I laugh because I hear that a lot. Give you a little bit of comfort on this. We're building. We handle all of we're going to be handling all of Martin County's facilities. We've actually stepped up and we'll be delivering about $500,000 savings a year over their existing process, which is relatively similar to yours. So they're going from about $1.2 million to around $560,000 a year and funding 2 facilities with the savings. Fort Pierce has just done the same thing. What we've delivered in Haines City, 4 facilities in Clay County. We've delivered a facility in Pembroke Pines. So, and for the commissions also, we are very competent as a design-build contractor. In fact, most of our facilities are delivered under a design-build mechanism. Originally, though, the city had chosen to move down more of a traditional design, bid, build process, which takes some time to it. And so that's one of the other reasons why, there was a little bit of delay just going through that process, and then we switched back to design-build in order to accommodate some of the issues that we ran into.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Mark Mucher again, a couple things. First, as an editorial comment, it's unfortunate that we don't have a wastewater expert on the commission anymore. But as Scott will remember, she did introduce this and heartily support it. Looking at this spreadsheet, I guess
she had gone to the plants and had done. Actually, she and Rob went to.
Yeah, they went to site visits, and
so
we're talking about Jane Burton. I guess it's academic. I'm kind of curious as to why FPL's on this spreadsheet, except there's a little footnote down the bottom says FPL rates in 2017, and that would be a good thing, except for some reason, and maybe this won't be a factor at that time, you figure it costs twice as much for Florida Power and Light to power a centrifuge as it does for City of Vero Electric, which I find a little unusual. And also, of course, you add the franchise fee to Florida Power and Light and nothing to City Power. So, and of course, the franchise fee comes back to the city. But those are my only comments on that, but I do support this from what little I know about it.
Thank you.
Just to respond, we do have a contract with Florida Power and Light that runs through to the end of 2016, so we're still projecting if that deal does close that we would have that projection.
Any further comments? We have a motion on the table. Scott, do you want to repeat it? Your motion?
Yeah, that we recommend that the city council approve this wastewater treatment handles the BPR process and equipment.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Rob.
Before I go, I'd like to jump in and just announce one thing. We are out to bid with the components for the step system, and we will not be able to, because of timing, we have a lot of people that they're having failing septic systems, so we will get the bids in on December 23rd. We're planning on taking it right to the City Council meeting on January 6th for approval. So I will get that information out to you as commissioners prior to, just like you would see it in the City Council agenda package, but we plan on skipping that just because of a timing issue. But we also have a Bethel Creek House meeting with the residents from Bethel Creek scheduled for January 8th, so that you're aware of that, and we will be getting stuff updated on the website.
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you. And then Commissioner Blumstein, and to respond to your question about composting, I guess a little bit of history and maybe education around what's going on in the state of Florida. Certainly one thing I probably don't need to educate you on is the nutrient pollution issues associated with Lake Okeechobee and the watershed areas that are going on through the state. Fairly straightforward in headline news in terms of what's occurring there. One of the responses that the Florida Department of Environmental Protection took in kind of a number of years ahead is they saw they investigated a number of the sources of what pollutes some of those freshwater-ish areas. And one of those identified sources was biosolids, and so they started implementing more strict regulations around land application of these materials, as well as around the final disposal of these materials. My company, we've been operational in the state since 2006, and we actually have the largest footprint in the state. And one of the things that we started doing was taking the position that we're going to start investing our own capital side by side with our partners, with the city. So we are building large-scale facilities around the state to be able to act almost as a replacement disposal outlet as opposed to going to a landfill, to be able to go to a compost facility. The facilities are designed under a proprietary process that we've developed and patented and have an issued patent in the United States Patent Office. And what it allows for us to do is to produce a high efficiency fertilizer that actually minimizes groundwater pollution and can be used as an offset to traditional commercial fertilizers, and thereby eliminate the leaching factor that you get from traditional commercial fertilizers, as well as provide water conservation properties. So for about every acre of land that the materials applied to, we conserve around 16,000 gallons of fresh water consumption. And we've done all these studies with the University of Florida IFRS Center, as well as the University of Penn State, and we're a pretty diligent company. We actually have a science advisory board that's made up of some of the world's leaders in wastewater treatment, from the chairman of the US EPA's PEC committee, guys that wrote the World Health Organization's water and wastewater treatment programs, a number of people that actually wrote the federal guidelines for the United States. So they advise us and help us kind of think about what are the trends and how to make sure we manage appropriately. What that's led us to is we've partnered Specifically, we partnered with the City of Haines City in the center part of the state and have actually just funded, the state funded a 100% project of the project costs to build this facility as a replacement alternative for outlets. We're also looking at siting a facility somewhere here in the Vero Beach, Indian River area, and we've got a few sites that we've been identifying. We've found a site up in Jacksonville that we're closing on, and we have a site down in the Broward, Miami-Dade areas that we're actually, we've reached final negotiations on. So you'll see us probably invest over $15 to $20 million of our own capital in the state to be partners with cities like yours for a long period of time. We think it's a prudent measure, and actually at the end of the day, when you look at landfill costs, for example, and I think the city actually has a very good contract right now with Lake Okeechobee's landfill, where in fact it's pretty airtight, they can't turn you away. In fact, many cities around the state have found their tipping fees at the landfills go from $25 to $30 to $35 to $40, and it's now at $55, and they're talking about going to $65, and in fact, I think some cities are being turned away. That is all a result of this new regulation that came through, supply and demand, and also unlike all of us think that a landfill effectively can just take anything, this material has a high degree of water in it by the nature of it's coming out of your wastewater plant. What that does is it actually creates instability within a landfill. And so as a result, a landfill can only take a certain percentage of biosolids or organic waste as a percent of the municipal solid waste that they take in. Otherwise, they end up upsetting the balance of that landfill itself. So you have all of these forces at work, and what my company did was did an evaluation of all the different methods of disposal and what ones that would allow for the most environmentally and economically responsible method for disposing or managing this material over a 10, 20, 30-year period that took into account not only DEP issues but economic issues, so that we can provide these services hopefully at or below the existing cost structure of the city.
That's good. Thank you. We may see you back in front of our planning and zoning board one of these
potentially.
days.
Potentially.
Thank you for your information.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate it.
Next on the agenda is the current status of the electrical system study.
The study, as you know, is in two parts. One is the rate study, which is in the process and working with the finance department, and the contractor has been chosen and approved, so we're in that exercise of doing the rate study and doing the analysis, gaining the information that the contractor really needs. We had the evaluation for the optimization, looking at different companies that bid on that, and we interviewed 3. We were going to interview 4, but Black & Veatch, for some reason at the last minute, said they were concerned about a conflict of interest and pulled their name. But we still had some pretty large names in that business. Mr. Stradley was on that review committee in which the interviews took place yesterday, I believe it was, Scott, and they have made a unanimous recommendation for number 1. We obviously will have to sit down and negotiate with them, and then if you can't reach an agreement, you go to number 2 under the state requirements of those interviews. So you can't do it based on price, you have to do it based on qualifications. So we're in the process of doing that. We have built into our rate consultant that's doing our rate study that they will be here for a period of time and then be able to put the optimization recommendations into their model for pricing, and which will help us as we go into the future, but it ties the two together as we go out into the future in the process for about 5 years. So we feel like that we're meeting our goals and timing. We hope to have that recommendation to the City Council on January the 6th for the optimization study. Open to any questions you may have.
My experience with a qualifications cycle and then the pricing is you try and qualify several vendors and then say, okay, you're both 2 or 3 qualified, who's going to be the lowest price of those qualified?
Under state law, you cannot do it based on price. The only thing you can do is try to...
Even after the qualification?
Even after the qualification. In other words, that we go to the top vendor. If we can't reach a price that's satisfactory to both parties, we go to number 2. We try to, and price not being the relevant thing, but if we can't reach an agreement, then we go to number 2. We try to negotiate a contract there. If we can't reach that, then you go to number 3. I think by the time you get down to number 3, although I will say in this particular case, we had 3 very qualified bidders on this, or 3 qualified vendors that were there. We had one that had bid both on the rate study as well as the optimization study, and so we had I think a good field. The key is this is not going to be a real cheap study, in the fact that we are looking for someone who is going to come in, for example, and look at the need for capacitors on our system. How can we save on our line losses and those type? How do you optimize the use of your transformers and your substations as to the loads that are taking place there? Is there an area that we can reduce some of that? They're also going to look at the man hours that we spend in our department. So it's going to be a very comprehensive type of review as to how they make some recommendations back to us for cost reduction. But they will also look at our power supply agreements. The firm that that has been recommended as number 1 has extensive experience in that process of looking at power supply agreements, but actually all 3 of those vendors did as well.
It just seemed like it would have worked out a little bit more in our favor if there was some sort of competitive bidding on price, but if you can't, you can't.
That's right, and I think that's the reason the state law was put there. I presume, I can't really speculate other than the fact that it is there. And it's ironic that you can negotiate price with attorneys, but you can't with engineers. I guess whoever's the strongest lobbyist is the one that wins. And so you have to go through that exercise, but I mean, that's the nature of the limitations that we have to work within. But I think from the average citizen, the irony is that we are sort of accustomed that you put it out for a bid. The theory is you're getting the same qualifications from all those who bid, or you tighten up your specs enough to get that, then you're challenged at that end as well. So, Mr. Adley, do you have any comments on the firms that were interviewed?
Well, it was a very interesting process. I had never been involved in purchasing an RFP review before, and so we actually had initially 8 firms respond, and we narrowed that down to the top 4, as Jim mentioned. Actually, our top choice dropped out, and so that we had 3 that came yesterday. They were all very qualified. We chose unanimously Power Services. I was actually very, very pleased that there was our ratings were very consistent. We all picked Power Services as our top choice. We had one difference in our second choice, and of course then one difference in our third choice. But they were all very consistent. Power Services, how they impressed me is they brought forward, I thought, ideas of where we may be able to save costs, more than just talking about their capacity, their qualifications and other jobs that they had done. They mentioned things that you have mentioned today, Jim, so I know that you picked up on that as well. Things like line loss, where we may be able to reduce the amount of power we purchase because we don't waste as much through inefficiencies in our system. And I felt that they were the engineering firm that caught the vision of extracting cost from the system as being one of our major driving forces in doing this optimization. So what we have in our handouts, and I'm sure it'll be made available online later, is their PowerPoint, the PowerPoint presentation they gave us, and also the audio recording of their presentation. Is that now a public record?
Yes, it is a public record after, I believe it's a public record after it's reviewed, right?
Yes.
Yeah, after the recommendation's made, all of it is now public record.
Okay, so if anybody would be interested in listening to that, this, having the PowerPoint slides available here would really help. We also attached into our information today the attachment A from the RFQ, which lists the main meat of the engineering firms and what we hope they will accomplish. But I would, again, they were three very good firms. I just felt this one seemed to understand our needs a little more than the other two, which is why they got my recommendation. Tom, if you have any? No, I think okay. And so I would like to make a motion that we would recommend to City Council that they proceed with the hiring process of Power Services.
Do we have any idea what the difference, the differential in cost is, even though we can't choose by cost?
No, sir, we don't. The only thing we can go is based on the history and what we've seen in other places. The pricing's about the same. The scope is what you're really pricing out. Usually it's a price per man hour and that kind of stuff, and your principals cost similar to what you do in attorneys. You get your principals that are real high, and sometimes you can negotiate a blended cost and per hour, then you could try to work with that. But for example, one of the firms that we interviewed yesterday was a national, very, very large firm that virtually everywhere. And I think their cost, looking at them, they probably would have been higher because they have a lot more overhead. And you really, and there is a charge, obviously, for overhead as well. But there is no way to see what the differential is until you eliminate.
When do you, if City Council agrees with this, when do you negotiate the pricing?
Following, if it gets to the council on January the 6th, then we will start negotiating pricing, and then we'll bring a contract back to the City Council for consideration.
And also to the utility?
Yes, we can bring it to the Utility Commission as well.
Is this attachment A that we have as part of the handout? Is this a complete list? It says major topics to be addressed. Is there a list that lists specifically all the topics that will be inclusive in this study?
That will be included in the contract.
Yes, sir.
And until we get down to narrowing down what we're going to put in the contract, I think that's where you're going to get that exclusive list.
One of the things I think with an optimization is that we don't want to restrict what the engineering firm is going to look at, although we have restricted it as to the rate structure. And we don't want to restrict that because we want them to come in and look at our whole system and find out where we can be more efficient.
I agree with you completely on that, but what point I was raising is try to get determine if we go into the study, we're going to spend a certain amount of money. What should we expect specifically, as best we can at this point in time, to come out of it? In other words, not say you can't go any further than this, but we will get at least these issues or these questions addressed coming out of the study, and have that publicized so that it's publicly understood what the study, the parameters of the study, so to speak.
Yes, sir, that'll be, and hopefully it'll be very specific in the contract as to what elements of our system are going to be looked at. One of the things you don't want to do is get them too narrow, but at the same time, I don't want them studying something we have no way of financially making happen. One of the good things in the review of the three consultants that we had, Tom Richards, our utility director, as well as our T&D director, both sat in on that, and Ted Fletcher was there to add, because those are going to be the two elements that are really the broad-based, and then you narrow down to that, and I think T&D is going to be involved in the this process as much as anybody else. But hopefully we'll get those elements down into a fine-tuned, and these will be the areas in which they look. We will be counting on the consultant to give us what their experience has shown in the areas in which they have found cost reductions. Again, going back to the company that's going to be recommended, they have experience in a lot of municipals as well as a lot of broad-based utilities in which they have delved into some of the smaller elements that a lot of us would overlook. Until the presentation was made, back in a past life of mine, I remember when capacitors were a big issue, trying to reduce the line losses and efficiency of the system, and we really haven't discussed much of that here in Vero Beach, but this company did bring that out as a possible, and I know that, again, that's one minor element that can see the reduction. They also have experience in looking at power plants and either decommissioning or whatever the options are on that, so we will be getting their advice in that process as well.
What about the timing of all this, given the suit that's on the table and potentially losing the town as a client? Won't that change things?
No, sir, it won't. The fact of the matter is this probably is a little long overdue, but no, it will not have that. We got to remember the town is only 7 to 8% of our customer base. It also is primarily residential, so it does not have the major impacts of the commercial customers, for example, on West 60, that are the shopping centers and all that. So the impact of them, of the shores, is going to be, relatively small in looking at it for the overall system. But at the same time, there are going to be elements of this that will have to take into consideration. For example, we own a substation within the corporate limits of Indian River Shores. We actually own the ground underneath, and I guess from a perspective, I'm not sure how a judge is going to say you have to give that substation up, because it is part of the reliability of the total system. And so those type of elements will probably still stay in place, even if from some unbelievable world that a judge determines that we've got to hand over our assets to someone else. But it should not have an impact on this study.
And then this presupposes that there is no negotiation with FPL and shutting everything down and just going to FPL. I mean, that's been decided pretty much.
No, sir. This still would take into consideration, because the elements of this study obviously will have an impact as to how we go through probably the next couple of years before we could have a closing. But even if we had the closing, I think that this would give a better insight for FP&L into our system as to what we're doing and how we're doing it. So optimistic on my part, I'm sure, because there are elements of that contract, the way it's written out, that are going to have to be totally renegotiated, because, as you know and have read, there's been changes in the way that the dynamics of that contract. So let's say we go back into negotiations. If we can show a higher valued asset that's taking place in the transaction, maybe it'll be something that would be a benefit to the city as far as dollars.
Good.
Do you have a budgeted amount on this?
No, sir, we don't. That would be something that we would have to take out of our capital.
Is there a second to Scott's motion?
Second.
Okay, I thought it was seconded earlier. Okay.
No, it wasn't.
No?
Oh, did you? Okay, well, then, any more discussion?
No, I can be mistaken. I just thought it was, but it's not an issue.
Was a second?
I did not hear a second, but now.
I didn't hear a second either.
No, I don't think it was.
No.
I misunderstood.
All right, is there a second to Scott's motion to move this to the city council?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? None.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have the fiscal year 13-14 fourth quarter financial report.
Good morning. I actually have three things here that kind of all go together. I'm Cindy Lawson. I'm the finance director for those of you new members of the commission that I haven't met yet. So I hope that you received a copy of the fourth quarter financial report. Did everyone? Just want to kind of hit the highlights.
No.
The first comment being that this is unaudited. Should have been included with your agenda, maybe?
Did I receive a copy?
No? Yes?
Should have been on your backup material.
You did not receive a hard copy? You would have received an electronic version.
I did not receive a hard copy of
No, and you would not have received a hard copy. You would have gotten the electronic version.
it electronically. And when was that sent?
Last week.
It's there.
I'll make sure you get a copy of it.
These are unaudited,
I may have
and
it, and that's-
we're going through the process right now of preparing the audited financial statements. So there may still be some small year-end adjustments that take place before the audited financial statements come out in March. But for the most part, these are pretty close to the way that we will end the year. And I just want to point to a couple of highlights in the electric and water and sewer utilities, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. For those of you who actually have a copy of it, if you look on page 23, we'll start with the electric fund revenues, which were very favorable compared to our revised budget, but there's two things you might want to notice. We've got some negative revenues for hurricanes. I don't know if you remember, and maybe we haven't had this conversation extensively with the Utility Commission, but we are in the process, it's been about a 5-year process, of disputing the return of some funds with FEMA. And so at this point in time, although our appeal has been favorably looked upon by the state and forwarded to FEMA with a recommendation that they approve it and stop trying to take back this money, in the meantime, we reached an agreement with the state that we would begin partially repaying the funds that we don't think we owe until the final outcome of the federal determination on the appeal. So that's the reason you see some negative hurricane revenues. That's the beginning of our repayment of money that we anticipate in the long run that we will get back. The other thing you see on this page that's a negative number down toward the bottom third of the page there is a minus $184,000 on gain or loss on disposal of assets. We talked about that before. That is the book loss for the fuel that we sold out of the tank, which was on our books at a higher value than the cash we actually received for it. So the good news is it was an injection of cash. The bad news is it was actually a book loss based on the original value that it was booked at. The other, I think, really piece of good news, if you look at the very end of this section on the electric utility on page 30, where we've begun including a quarterly balance sheet, is that as of September 30th, we are back to 91 days of unrestricted cash on hand, which, as we've discussed, has long been our goal, about that 90-day mark or better. And we started the year, I think, at like 76. And so despite the fact that we used some cash to pay off a loan, which has improved our position for the coming year, we are back to 91 days of unrestricted cash on hand and a total cash balance of a little over $30 million. And our bonds and notes payable has gone down substantially because of the early payoff of that Series 2008 loan. So all in all, a good year for the electric utility, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the rate sufficiency. The one thing to keep in mind about the expenses, both on the electric utility and on water and sewer, is, as we've discussed before, the principal payments on the debt are not included in the expenses in this report, and therefore you can take the expenses and you can add about $4 million to them for principal payments in electric and almost $2 million in water and sewer. The water and sewer fund had a good year, and again, we don't do quarterly rate sufficiency, but you can see that the revenues and expenses were both right on target with our revised budget. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about the report. As I said, the final audited statements will be out in March, and those are, I think, a little better because you can see the statement of cash flows, you can see the final balance sheet, you can see it cast as a income statement as well. Any questions? We'll move on to the fourth quarter fiscal year 13-14 rate sufficiency. I'm assuming everyone got a copy of this. This has been updated to include our actual billed revenues, our actual purchase power through the end of September 30th, 2014. It also includes these preliminary unaudited results on expenditures and not just the budgetary numbers anymore. And the good news is that with all of that incorporated, we show that we ended fiscal 13-14 with a surplus of about $770,000 as compared to our original forecast back at the beginning of the the year of about $931,000. And so we ended up to the positive in nearly the same place that we wanted to when we started the year, despite the fact that we lowered rates a couple of times, including a little over 4% in the past summer. So with that result, in 13-14, we bring those current rates forward into 14-15, and this is the next item on your agenda, but they're kind of all connected. And what I'm showing, at least with October actuals included, is that for 14-15, we have rate sufficiency at our current rates. Originally, before we incorporated the October actuals, we were almost even, break even. With the October actuals included, we're at about $400,000 surplus. That demonstrates, I think, the volatility that we can have from one month to the next. It's the reason that we don't review these rates monthly. We review them quarterly, so we get a little more of the variability out of it. But right now, based on this, we feel comfortable that we can recommend to council that we leave our rates where they are for now, that we look at this again at the end of the first quarter when we have actuals for the entire first quarter, which is what we always do. And what we're hopeful is that we can maybe hold the line on these rates until we have the results of the formal rate study, and wait until that time before we make any other adjustments, in case not only are there adjustments to the rates themselves, but the rate structure, that we could do that all at the same time. So for now, as I said, we feel like we have rate sufficiency at the current rates. We ended 13-14 well. We look fine so far going into 14-15, and we'd like, with hopefully your endorsement, to recommend to council that we leave the rates where they are for the time being, and that we look at them again after the end of the first quarter. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the specifics on either one of these. Otherwise, if there's any way you want to formalize a motion and a vote about our recommendation on leaving the rates alone, we would appreciate that as well.
Any questions?
When you said you had 30 million of 91 days of unrestricted cash, is that the unrestricted, on the balance sheet, unrestricted cash plus receivables?
That's just the unrestricted cash and investments at the top, the 18.9 million.
Oh, I thought you said 30 million. That's
30 million in total cash balance, 18.9 million in unrestricted. Because what's also included in our cash balance, for instance, are things like customer deposits, which although we have them in cash, they don't belong to us, and so they fall into the restricted assets.
That's in the restricted cash,
those are the restricted cash.
So you add those two together.
It is. As a matter of fact, the restricted cash and investments is essentially the sum of the customer deposits and the short-term portion of the bonds and notes payable, the sinking fund portion of the bonds and notes payable, and then some of the accounts payable.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I make a motion that we endorse the rate sufficiency study to City Council, and that we, with no change in rates.
I'll second it. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Thank you. And certainly, if you haven't had a chance to look at the monthly reports, or if there are any other questions that come to you as you go through this material, you're always welcome to give me a call outside these meetings, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Now we'll move to old business, update on modernization of utility billing system. That's you again. Okay.
That was on there. I think back when we talked about the optimization study, we talked about some of the plans that we have for customer service and for our billing system and billing software in particular, which is extremely out of date. There's really three components here. The first part is to actually bring our utility billing software up to the current published version by the company. We are about 10 years and 9 versions out of date, and as you might suspect, in 10 years, that technology has made a fair amount of progress. Once we've done that, our next phase, if you will be to incorporate the results of a banking review that we had with our banking services provider and use that updated software to start doing some of the things that we think will be more efficient, e-box payments, which is true electronic bank-to-bank payments, and also what's called lockbox, where Wells Fargo are actually the people that process our mailed payments. And in the process of doing that, also make it possible for people to use their credit cards or debit cards to pay their bills by providing a place on, actually on the little bill coupon where you could write in your credit card or debit card number, much like you do sometimes with, say, medical payments, and make your payment that way, as opposed to having to call on the phone through our third-party provider. That is the only way you can do credit card payments right now.
See if I understand what you're saying, Cindy. On that credit card, is that, you're not putting up a website where a person could sign on to it, password protect, so forth, and then they could pay online with their credit card, or do you have to?
That is our third phase. What I would like to do after our software is updated and our banking service software is updated and integrated is take that third step. And of course, this part of it, which will be, I think maybe relatively expensive, although very, well worth it, really wouldn't happen until after we get to the place where we either culminate the contract with FP&L or not. But what I'd like to see us have is a really good customer service web portal, much like FP&L's if you've ever seen it, where you can go online, you can make a payment, you can start budget billing yourself, you can do rudimentary setup and cancellation of accounts, lots and lots of the things that right now your only option is to actually physically come to the customer service department to take care of that kind of business. We'd like to set up a good website portal where people can do a lot of that themselves. Certainly, we think that after some education, the bulk of people now in the current demographic prefer to do their business that way. People like to, pay their bill on a Saturday morning or set it up themselves and not have to actually have a physical interaction with customer service. And so we hope that that'll be the case. So timing-wise, we have already started. We kicked it off a week or so, or last week actually, the software billing upgrade. That is going to take until about the end of May, beginning of June. It's fairly extensive, and it's one of those things that has to be right. We can't afford any glitches in rendering bills and collecting revenue. Once we've done that, if I recall, the process of implementing the e-box lockbox with the bank is about a 3 to 5 month process, which takes us into fiscal 15-16. And then next summer, when we do budget, we'll talk about what other initiatives we might have for 15-16. So essentially, real changes won't be apparent to anyone probably till toward the end of next year. But there's lots happening behind the scenes to put the technology in place so that we can make those changes and improvements.
Do I understand you to say that if you update to the current version of the existing software that the city has to use, that software has the capacity to include these enhancements that you would put into the portal, interface with that portal so that you have a seamless processing, if you may, of bills and so forth electronically?
It does, and it's really been a timing thing. We talked with the bank about this e-box thing, and I don't know, I'll give that to you briefly. Right now, if you go onto your bank and do an online bill pay of a city electric utility bill, what you may not realize is that there's not an electronic bank-to-bank capture of that payment. What happens is your bank actually produces a paper check, and our cashiering department is inundated with giant stacks of paper checks, and those paper checks are actually worse than the paper check that you, the customer, sit down and write and put your account number on, because they don't have account numbers on them typically. And therefore, there's a process of matching the names and the addresses, et cetera, up to the bills that takes a lot of time. When we initially talked about correcting that by implementing this e-box technology through Wells Fargo, our banking provider, it was going to require a custom routine within the city's billing software to accommodate it. What we discovered was that the current version of the city's billing software already has the capability to accept those e-box transmissions. And so, as much as we wanted to go out and tackle these banking improvements, we realized it made much more sense for us to start start with the fundamentals, bring the city's billing software up to the current version, which would already have, many of these capabilities, or at least the technology to receive the kinds of file transmissions the bank wants to send already built in, rather than wasting money to customize the software yet again. So that's the reason why the part that isn't going to be very exciting for anyone, at least I hope not, that no one will notice, is that we are upgrading our billing software. And once we've done that, starting next June, July, we can start to do some of the things that will make a difference in efficiencies and make a difference to the customers.
Cindy, do you plan on running the new billing software and the old billing software in parallel?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the timing was good that we actually replaced a server in, and so they're putting the new billing software into a separate server. And yes, part of the huge, it doesn't take them that long to make the software happen. Part of the schedule, a huge part of the schedule, is extensive testing before the go live. Lots and lots of it, to make sure that when we do go live with it, none of you notice. That's our plan.
You'll be doing testing with live customers?
We'll be
We'll
be doing testing with real data, but not with live customers. We have the billing software is running and doing its thing and rendering your bills. Over here is essentially the new software in a totally separate environment with real data being put into it, so that we can then run fake bills and look at them extensively to make sure they're working and wring out all the problems. But there's one weekend where we go live and the next set of bills comes from the new software. So that's why the schedule is, probably a month's worth of them installing the new system and 5 months worth of testing in various configurations before we go live.
Seems like you have two projects, yet upgrading of the software that's in hand, but how about the building of the portal?
The building of the portal is going to be the third project. We've got the upgrading of the software, then we've got the banking software improvements, and then we've got the website as number 3, kind of down the road. And a lot of, as I said, if we can get the banking software upgraded, all these paper checks will go away. That'll be huge, and therefore payments will get processed more efficiently. And second, with the banking software improvements late next year, we'll give people the ability to pay their bills by credit card, which you don't really have right now unless you call up call on the phone to that third-party provider. So things will start to improve toward the end of next year, and then that website portal will be the last step that we take, and that'll be fairly extensive. So
Cindy, have you taken into consideration the discounted amount to the bills that you'll get from the credit card company versus cash?
We'll have to when that time comes. Right now there's a service fee that's actually charged by our third-party provider for people to pay by credit card. So when we get there, we'll have to take that one into account.
Okay.
Is the hardware going to be able to support the new software, or?
Yes, that shouldn't be a problem at all.
Okay.
Yeah. Especially with the new server that we just had programmed into the budget, we'll be fine.
Any further questions? Thank you, Cindy. Thank you. Next, we have My Matters, of which I have none. And any members want to bring up any issues or matters? You can do it now. Next meeting will be...
Your next meeting is scheduled for January 13th. Your chairman will be out of town. He has asked that you look at having your meeting on January 20th, which is a week after January 13th on a Tuesday.
Well, 20th is okay with me. How about everyone else? We'd like to see him.
Okay, so the 20th at 9 o'clock.
Okay. All right, with that, we will adjourn the meeting.